Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. You can unmute yourself, Prabhuji. Okay, Hare Krishna. Please accept my humble obeisances.
Hare Krishna, please accept my humble obeisances. Glories to Srila Prabhupada and to Bhakti Charu Maharaj and to all of the Vaishnavas.
Hare Krishna. So today we are very fortunate and honored to have association of His Grace Vaikuntha Prabhuji. I will just like to give a brief introduction about Prabhuji. Prabhuji is a very senior disciple of His Holiness Mukund Swami Maharaj, and Prabhu joined. Prabhu first attended temple program in 1971 when he was just 14-year-old, and in 1975, Prabhu spent 5 days with Srila Prabhupada attending Srila Prabhupada classes when he visited Philadelphia for Rath Yatra festival. And 1978, Prabhu moved to Brahmachari Ashram in San Diego, USA. And about 1971, he met His Holiness Bhakti Charu Swami Guru Maharaj for the first time. And then he entered into the family life in 1988, and during which he continued his services in ISKCON and had a lot of association of His Holiness Bhakti Charu Swami Guru Maharaj. So we are very fortunate today to have his association. We will be hearing from him about his interactions with Srila Prabhupada, and then his early Krishna conscious life, and then Prabhu can share some of his moment with His Holiness Bhakti Charu Swami Guru Maharaj. And at last, if some questions are there, we can discuss. So we welcome Prabhu by loudly chanting one time Hare Krishna Mahamantra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Premavatar Prabhu. Thank you for kindly inviting me to speak about His Holiness Bhakti Charu Maharaj. I know you've been hearing from a lot of very senior devotees, and I'm sure that's been very wonderful glorification of Maharaj and remembrances of Maharaj. I'm just a kind of rank and file devotee, but somehow or other I had a good opportunity to meet with Maharaj over the years sometimes. So I guess from my side, I would just be sharing some more like personal glimpses and interactions with Maharaj. Maharaj, you know, he was connected with so many devotees all over the world. So the scope of what Maharaj has offered and is offering in the world in terms of Krishna consciousness is so vast, but you've been hearing from devotees from all over the world. So I guess today I was just going to speak about our own small interactions with him, but this is also important in my estimation because, you know, the fact that Maharaj was eager to serve all the devotees, irregardless of, you know, who they were or what they were doing. Maharaj has an incredible capacity to reciprocate with devotees and to try to help the devotees to progress in Krishna consciousness and to carry on in devotional service. So in my case, it was like that. As you mentioned, my history, I won't spend too much time on it. I'll say a little more because it ties into some of the discussions and instructions Bhakti Charu Maharaj gave me. I started going to the temple in 1971 in New York and Philadelphia. I grew up on the East Coast of the US, but I was only 14 at that time. I was a little young. So I was going to temple for about 7 years regularly before I joined the Brahmachari ashram in 1978. In 1975, I had the good fortune to spend 3 weeks at the temple in Philadelphia, during which time Srila Prabhupada came for the Rath Yatra. And it was a very wonderful experience. You know, like you hear about, we were preparing the temple for weeks in advance and planting flowers and painting his rooms and cleaning and fixing everything. You know, it was very wonderful, actually, the mood of devotion that came at that time to receive Srila Prabhupada. And so we were fortunate to attend some of his classes, one evening darshan, Rath Yatra like that. Some personal experience was also there. And that kind of, I had been studying his books for about 4 years, but that sort of pushed everything, I guess you'd say, further, faster. And from that time, I had the desire to fully commit myself, but it still took about 3 years. So some people are very slow in spiritual life, right? So we understand in Kali Yuga, that's one of the disqualifications, is very slow in spiritual advancement. So that was my case. But anyhow, finally, I did take it up in a more full-time way in 1978. And I moved into the temple ashram in San Diego, California. So then in 1979, I think it was 79, and you all may know better, but I think it was Maharaj's first preaching tour to the US. And he came down from Los Angeles to San Diego. We were a temple right on the coast, actually quite near the beach. And in those days, you know, most of the people that we were interacting with were still from what were called the hippies, you know, kind of a unfortunate class of living entities. But they had some qualification in that they had some renunciation of materialism, at least in the ordinary way. And they had some interest in spiritual life. So a lot of people coming to the temple. So Maharaj gave some nice classes. And I was very, you know, appreciative of the depth of his Krishna conscious wisdom. And then another devotee and myself were asked to take Maharaj out for a preaching program. So we took him to a place called Ocean Beach. And Ocean Beach, even today, surprisingly, in 2020, you can still find these kind of people in Ocean Beach, kind of like hippie types, you know, long hair and, you know, this sort of thing. So anyway, we didn't really have anywhere else to take him, because although I could see that Maharaj, you know, was a very refined person, these were the people that we were preaching to. So we took Maharaj there, and it was a home program, and there were a lot of young people there and a lot of hippies there. And Maharaj just related with them. I was recalling how Maharaj related with them in such a nice and natural way. And he spoke to them in a way that was just suitable for their understanding. Like, he was very casual with them. You know, later I learned, you know, that Maharaj had spent those years in Germany, and he was probably more familiar with Western people than I realized. But anyway, I remember being, you know, very impressed at how Maharaj was just able to see where the people were at and to preach to them and to relate with them in a very natural way, which made them, you know, very at ease and very able to hear from him and very able to appreciate the Krishna conscious message and association and kirtan that he was giving them. So that was the first time that I actually met Maharaj. Myself and another devotee, Yudhishthira Prabhu, we took him to this program. And he was just around, you know, 2 or 3 days in San Diego, and then he continued on because he was traveling to all the temples preaching. But I had a very nice impression. He was very fun to be with, to be honest with you. He was, you know, although he was a sannyasi and very senior to us, he was just very fun and approachable and friendly. And, you know, like, you didn't feel like so much of a distance or like an awe and reverence. He was very able, to relate with devotees, to relate with the public like that. So then we were mostly out distributing books and traveling around. So I didn't see Maharaj again for a few years. And then he was coming because he was always traveling and preaching. So at least in our neighborhood, he was coming in the 80s. And then what I wanted to talk about now was, I'm sure, something that you've all experienced and you've all heard a lot about from the devotees who have been speaking, is the depth of Maharaj's dedication to Srila Prabhupada. And of course, we know, when he first came to the shelter of Srila Prabhupada, how Prabhupada brought him so close and how he was serving Srila Prabhupada's transcendental form so nicely and with such dedication and with such depth of love and devotion. And as I can see, that has continued, throughout Maharaj's entire life. Like after Prabhupada's disappearance, that he took Srila Prabhupada's Vani literally on his head as his life and soul. And Maharaj really had no other ambition than to serve Srila Prabhupada. He considered that Srila Prabhupada's Vani was his life and soul, and he considered that ISKCON is Srila Prabhupada's body, and that every devotee in ISKCON is very dear to Srila Prabhupada. And he constantly, I just have a little glimpse of this, obviously, like a little, but I know also from hearing from others, Maharaj, as he traveled around the world, he was constantly supporting ISKCON projects, supporting ISKCON devotees, doing whatever he could, whether he had an interest in it or not. Like he came to America in the mid 80s. And at that time, America and probably the whole movement practically was going through a deep crisis of faith. These were very difficult times because just after Srila Prabhupada left the planet, we had to carry on in his physical absence. And, to put that in a little bit of perspective, at that time, the most senior devotees had been devotees for 9 or 10 years, or 12 years, you know what I mean? So you think about it now, like how many of you devotees have been devotees for 12 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, like everybody, or not everybody, but like many, many, right? So at that time, the most senior people had been devotees for 11, 12 years, you know what I mean? And so it wasn't and like in my case, not only was Srila Prabhupada the first pure devotee that I ever met, not only was he the first sannyasi I'd ever met, he was the first Indian person I'd ever met, So, we were not schooled in any kind of etiquette or culture. Devotees were very, very new, and now we have an amazing infrastructure that Srila Prabhupada created, because not only did Srila Prabhupada preach, but he sweat buckets of blood to make devotees and to create an infrastructure which is so complete with his books and his temples and his farms and restaurants. Like Prabhupada sometimes he said that I've given you the framework, now you just have to decorate it, right? So Prabhupada, he's given this amazing manifestation of Krishna consciousness, and he's given it this name of ISKCON, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And so in our immaturity, after Srila Prabhupada left, again, the only guru we had known, up till the time Prabhupada left, the only guru in ISKCON was Srila Prabhupada. And the only guru that any of us had any contact with whatsoever was Srila Prabhupada. So there was a bit of a, and we kind of okay, we have to continue now. And going forward, we made the zonal acharya system, and it was kind of like we young devotees, we expected those devotees to be like regional Prabhupads, and obviously in hindsight, this was not the best consideration, because they were also the most sincere devotees, but also young devotees. And I'm 63 now, and anybody, as you age, you see people go through life changes, you know what I mean? The way you see things when you're 20, when you're 30, when you're 40, when you're 50, sometimes a little different, not different necessarily in terms of your conviction, but just how you approach it, how life is going, what you're experiencing physically, mentally, emotionally. Although this movement is on the spiritual platform, we are dealing with a body, with a mind, with an intelligence, with a false ego, all these things with emotions. We all have our samskaras, especially, those of us that didn't grow up in devotional environments. We have our samskaras to deal with so many things. So anyway, long story short, everything began falling apart in the mid-80s. We had zonal acharyas leaving, giving up Krishna consciousness, going away. And this created a huge crisis of faith. And I have to say, at that time, this is, at least in our area, the zonal acharya, and just to make a slight correction, Premavatar Prabhu, and I don't mean to, but I actually wasn't initiated by Mukunda Maharaj. My wife is a disciple of Mukunda Maharaj, and I feel fortunate to have had a good bit of his association. But I joined in San Diego, and I was initiated by one of Prabhupada's disciples named Rameshwar Prabhu, who actually left in '86. But by Krishna's grace, he's come back, and he's very involved now in devotional service. And just on that note, I'll also mention Bhakti Charu Maharaj's kindness, because last year I was in Mayapur. Well, let me backtrack. Last year I wasn't able to come. Normally I'm there, but the year before, 2019, I was in Mayapur, and when they were giving the international and Indian book distribution awards, Bhakti Charu Maharaj, Gopal Krishna Maharaj, and Nareshwar Prabhu were presiding, because they were in charge of various, BBTs in India and things like that. And Rameshwar was there, and Bhakti Charu Maharaj, they actually decided, and they invited him to sit with them and to participate in giving the awards, which I thought was very, very nice. And I was appreciating. I always saw that with Bhakti Charu Maharaj, is that he's always trying to bring devotees back, bring devotees close. If there is some disagreement, some devotee goes away, or some devotee is feeling misunderstood, Maharaj will reach out to him. He'll go out of his way to actually approach that person, to give them love and devotional service, and to try to bring them back into the association. So I kind of saw it like that, and I was very happy to see that. And afterwards, I actually, during Guru Puja, I went to Rameshwar Prabhu and said, "It's so nice to see you reinstated in your constitutional position," because he was always pushing book distribution. So anyway, I was initiated by Rameshwar because at that time in San Diego. So anyhow, when he left, it was 1986. And when he left, it was right after 3 or 4 other prominent people, very prominent, I mean, the zonal acharyas, right, most prominent at that time, had left. So, it was like, they have a saying in English, a 1-2 punch. It's in boxing. Like, you hit a guy here, and then he's reeling from that, and then you hit him there. So ISKCON at that time, we were getting like a 1, 2, 3, 4 punch, and it was a very difficult time. And I hope I'm not being too controversial here, but I'm coming to a point. And so we were, in boxing, they say on the ropes, where the guy gets punched so many times, he's just like leaning against the ropes on the side of the ring. I don't know if you're familiar with boxing in India, but anyway, he's like ready to fall over, So it was a very difficult time. And frankly, devotees were leaving because they felt like, hey, the gurus are leaving. Why should I get up and take a cold shower at 4 o'clock in the morning and do all these things and perform all these austerities? And Bhakti Charu Maharaj, he just jumped into the breach. I mean, like, he was traveling all over, maybe all over the world, I don't know, but he was definitely traveling all over North America. And he came to San Diego in the course of his travels at that time. And he started giving seminars. And in these seminars, he would spend 3 or 4 days giving us seminars. And he was teaching us, what is Gaudiya Vaishnavism? What is ISKCON? What is our connection with the Gaudiya Math? Where are we coming from in Parampara? Who is Srila Prabhupada as our founder Acharya? What is that unique connection that every one of us in ISKCON has with Srila Prabhupada as our founder Acharya and as the primary Shiksha Guru for each and every one of us? How at that time, zonal acharyas and how continuing gurus in ISKCON are connecting their disciples with Srila Prabhupada. he was emphasizing this, and he was explaining it in the most clear educational way so that we could all understand that, guess what? It's not the end of the ship. The ship is not sinking, that we're going through a very rough storm. But if we just stay on the boat, and if we keep engaging in devotional service, and if we take shelter of Srila Prabhupada in his books and of the senior devotees as our Shiksha gurus, that we can weather this storm and we can go forward. And, you know, he was going all around America giving these seminars. And not only was he speaking to the big groups, but he was taking the time to speak to all the individuals. Any individual devotee who wanted some of his time, he would take the time and talk to them personally. So I'm one such individual, you know, just to give you an example, it's like you take a little, you know, bite of the rice and you can understand, you know, what is the quality of the pot. So like that. So like Maharaj was explaining all this. And then at that time, my service was taking care of the new devotees, the bhaktas and like that, training new devotees. And we had that program going on. So I had a lot of, you know, talks with him, and he was very kind, you know, and he was very open. So like one time he explained to me after Prabhupada had left, and he was explaining, you know, reasons why, you know, we should stay in ISKCON. And he even gave an example of himself, which was very, you know, kind of him. He explained that like after Srila Prabhupada left, how devastated he had felt. And at that time, there was so much confusion. And Srila Prabhupada had, because he was Bengali and because he was so close to Srila Prabhupada, sometimes Prabhupada would send him to visit his godbrothers and things like that. And sometimes Prabhupada had sent him to see Srila Sridhar Maharaj. And so he had, after Prabhupada's disappearance, he had taken some shelter of Srila Sridhar Maharaj. And he had a very nice relationship, and he was getting a lot of relief from him, you know, regarding Prabhupada's departure, because it's such a, Bhakti Charu Maharaj is so attached to Srila Prabhupada. And, you know, you really have that understanding that, like he said in his offering in 2012 that was published a lot, his Vyasa Puja offering, you really got the sense from that, that when Prabhupada left, he would have just stayed down in the hole, you know what I mean? Tamal Krishna Maharaj grabbed him by the hand, brought him up. But his mood was like when Prabhupada left, he was ready to leave. But because Prabhupada had given him instructions and had given him orders, there was no question of that. And he made those orders, again, his life and soul. So he was explaining to me that in that mood of missing Srila Prabhupada and needing solace, that he had been getting some very nice guidance and shiksha from Srila Sridhar Maharaj. But then later, what happened, a lot of devotees started going there. And unfortunately, one of the zonal acharyas took shelter of him, but he did so in a way that was not really very genuine. He was not following the process of devotional service anymore, but he wanted to keep his position. And ISKCON was naturally going to remove him from that role of initiating guru and zonal acharya. So rather than submit to that, he actually went outside of ISKCON and took shelter in the Gaudiya Math under Srila Sridhar Maharaj. And this was a big thing. I happened to be in Mayapur that year, it was 82. And he came dancing in with a big kirtan party, you know, with the idea of taking all of his disciples who were visiting Mayapur from England and South Africa and dancing out with them. And it was a very, you know, intense scene. I was standing on the railing of what we in those days called the Long Building, watching this all play out. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj, and I forget who else, but two senior godbrothers, they brought this devotee together, and they sat, that bench is still there in the garden in front of the Lotus Building. And they sat down with him, seemed like for a couple hours, and they just kind of talked it out. And then he danced back out with those devotees. And meanwhile, you know, it was a very tense scene. The temple presidents from those places, they were keeping all their boys in the rooms, you know, it was very, very intense. But anyway, so after that, you know, it was a very difficult time. And unfortunately, I think, you know, ISKCON overreacted. All the classes then became very pointed. I won't go into all those details because of the time. But anyway, Bhakti Charu Maharaj told me that, at that time, he had expressed to Srila Sridhar Maharaj that you shouldn't give this person shelter because he's not approaching you sincerely. That, and then when Srila Sridhar Maharaj gave him that shelter, anyway, that kind of convinced Bhakti Charu Maharaj that he really needed just to focus on ISKCON, and so at that time, he kind of pulled back a bit, from that. Not so much because of his own relationship, but because there was a misunderstanding developing within ISKCON of devotees going outside of ISKCON with other motives. So anyway, that was just something that he told me at that time. And to me, it was very significant because here's someone so advanced like him, but he was also, for the sake of Prabhupada's body, ISKCON, that he was even, foregoing that relationship, which was very valuable to him, for that unity within ISKCON when it became a problem, like that. And he also advised me personally at that time because, we didn't know what to do. I mean, gurus are leaving, you're initiated by so-and-so. And I didn't know, a lot of devotees were getting reinitiated. And then I had a lot of personal talks with Maharaj. And he advised me personally that he didn't feel that I should get reinitiated because I had been around since 71 and had some association with Srila Prabhupada. And my commitment to ISKCON was, even though I wasn't a Prabhupada disciple, it was kind of like that. And he just felt that I should just carry on in that way. I mean, sometimes in my heart, I felt like approaching him to get reinitiated. I considered him like a Shiksha guru to me, but because he had told me that, I never, pursued that, like the Diksha, the reinitiation is Diksha. But anyway, that's one example. I'm just one person. But along with giving these seminars, which helped many devotees to stay in the movement, to stay in ISKCON, to stay in their service, he was also taking time with individuals like myself and anybody else who approached him. But anyway, I just wanted to point that out because that was, it wasn't like he had that much going on in North America. That wasn't like his zone, or it wasn't an area that he was specifically preaching. But when he saw a problem anywhere in ISKCON, he would dive in. Like he would dive in with no personal motive. Like I don't even think he was initiating guru then. Like he was diving in to try to stabilize the problem in ISKCON. And this is not something that I personally know, but I remember hearing, I think maybe in the 90s, that like that whole thing when New Mayapur was lost, right? Just another example, like because when the zonal acharya from that part of Europe had left and everything had crashed. One thing is some of the zonal acharyas, they were more into linking their disciples with Prabhupada. Some of them were very centered on themselves more. And when they left, it was even more catastrophic because the devotees felt so connected with that individual. So that happened in Europe, in Southern Europe. And the movement contracted to a degree that you can't even imagine, And as a result, at a certain point, they even lost the New Mayapur temple, like they weren't able to pay the mortgage and it was lost to the banks or the creditors or whatever. And I had visited there once in 1984 just to give you a snapshot of that. At that time, that was the zonal Gurukula. They had 120 students. They had a huge Gurukula, wonderful Gurukula. Mother Kripa Mai was running, Indradumna Maharaj's former wife. They had cows. They had a Goshala. They had tons of devotees, beautiful deity worship, hundreds of devotees. And then it went down to where like 3 or 4 devotees and they couldn't pay the mortgage. And actually the whole thing was lost, And Bhakti Charu Maharaj just dove in there, and he found donors, he raised money. He actually got some people that didn't look like ISKCON because they didn't even want to give it back to ISKCON. So he had some people set up a whole thing that didn't look like ISKCON to actually go in there and buy it at the auction or whatever, and then immediately give it back to ISKCON. So, these are examples to me of how dedicated in every way, shape, and form His Holiness Bhakti Charu Maharaj was to ISKCON, to Srila Prabhupada, and how any way he could possibly help. If he saw an opportunity, he'd do it, not for himself, but for his service to Srila Prabhupada, and that's, very amazing. So I guess because of the time, I'm just trying to move forward a little bit chronologically. I got married in 1988, and from that time was still in the Grihastha ashram. And so in the 1990s, my wife and I, we had started a small preaching center just about 25 miles from the large temple in San Diego. There's a little town called Encinitas, and it's, maybe you've heard of Paramahamsa Yogananda. He wrote a book, Autobiography of a Yogi. So he came to America like way back in 1920s, and he had some success preaching. And one of his early disciples had bought him a big, big piece of land right on the ocean. And to this day, they have a temple there, and they have a retreat center, and members of the Self-Realization Fellowship, his organization, they come there from all over the world. So because that small town, it had this big, big self-realization temple. It has all these Indian gopurams, and it's very beautiful. So the city of that city, they even put a beach right next to there, like a government state beach called Swami's Beach, you know. So from the 1920s and 30s, that town has had a reputation, some connection with Indian spirituality anyway. So a lot of yoga groups were there, and there's a lot of interest there. So we opened a small preaching center there. And so we were living there and doing this small preaching center. So when Maharaj would come to America, he was always very, very kind. He would come and visit us at the preaching center, and he would, you know, lead nice kirtan, and he would give lecture. And one thing I noted at that time was that he was very sensitive because, again, we were mostly preaching to the public. You know, preaching center, you don't usually have a huge congregation, although we had some congregation, but, you know, mostly it's the public. Like we had programs 3 nights a week, and before the program, we'd do a Harinam through the town, and then people would follow us back, and then, you know, we'd have the program like that. And we'd have, you know, the standard kirtan, Bhagavad Gita, kirtan, prasadam, like that. And we were mostly preaching to young people. And that town is famous for, also famous for skateboarding. So there were like a lot of skateboard people there and surfing people there. And that's the kind of people that were coming, you know, young people. And Maharaj would speak in a way that they could understand it. You know, like Maharaj, he's so spiritually educated and so learned, but he could actually bring it down to something that people could assimilate, you know. And I was always appreciating that. And then other times, because there was one professor of a nearby university that we were cultivating. And so sometimes he would come, and sometimes he would bring university students. And I remember one night, there were a lot of people from the university there. And Maharaj gave this lecture, and it was so scholarly. Like he was just going through the whole, like the Vedas and the Vedanta and the Bhagavad, like he was just went through the whole history. And it was like, they were just like, you know, these guys, you know, like very learned people. So I was just appreciating, you know, how sensitive Maharaj was, that according to the audience, he would speak, you know, just in exactly the right way, you know. And he was very kind also. He would come and do the program in the evening, and oftentimes he'd come back the next day for breakfast or for lunch, you know, and just spend time with us. We were like a family and maybe a few close people. One time he came for lunch, and well, actually, I'll get to that. But one last thing on the preaching center programs. Right now we're in Michigan. Our daughter married a very nice devotee, Deva Madhava Prabhu, and they're running a preaching center in Michigan. So we just came for a visit. But we were just on a trip, and we were back in California. And one night we stayed with some devotees, and it was a devotee who used to live in that same town, Mother Kanka. She's a very early disciple of Srila Prabhupada. So one time Bhakti Charu Maharaj was coming to do the program in our small preaching center, and Kanka just told me this story I had forgotten. And she was leading the kirtan when Maharaj came in. And so when she finished, you know, when she saw him come, she kind of wrapped it up and stopped, you know, for Maharaj to take over. But then Maharaj just came up to her and said, "You must be an older devotee because you're leading these tunes from, you know, that Prabhupada's time, you know." And then she said, "Yes, well, you know, thank you, Maharaj. I am a Prabhupada disciple." So then afterwards, you know, Maharaj came up to her after his lecture, and he very, very humbly said, "You know, you're my senior god sister, you know, and you must have had so much association with Srila Prabhupada. Can you kindly tell me, you know, share some of your pastimes with Srila Prabhupada?" And then, you know, she was obviously she felt funny because Maharaj is so senior and advanced, but at the same time, he genuinely wanted to hear from her about Srila Prabhupada. So she spent, I think she said like 45 minutes, sharing Prabhupada pastimes that she had experienced. And she said Maharaj was just so grateful to her, that she had shared that. So from that, I was also appreciating Maharaj's humility. He's sannyasi. By that time, he's sannyasi, GBC, initiating, guru, so many things. But he was always very, very appreciative of his god brothers and his god sisters, and very, wanting to reciprocate them with them. So I was happy to hear that just the other night, to be reminded of that. And so then, as I was starting to say, he would also make personal visits after the program. Sometimes he'd come back the next day, spend time with us. One time he had come to lunch, actually. And so we had an outdoor lunch because the weather in California is pretty nice. And so we're out in the yard having lunch. And, we had just had I think our second child. So Maharaj, spoke a bit, and we had prasadam. And then my wife approached him and she said, Maharaj, raising children, it's difficult. I have two babies, a 4-year-old and a newborn baby. And sometimes I'm finding it hard to finish my rounds. Of course, I'm chanting my rounds, but it's a real struggle, and sometimes the quality of the chanting is not there, you know what I mean? So then, and she was asking him, what can I do, personal advice. And, Maharaj explained to her that, it's very, very important to chant your rounds, and you should always try to, and at the same time, you should, in the course of your daily activities, kind of just like the gopis, always try to remember Krishna and sing about Krishna and like that. And then he said, of course, I know it's very difficult in America because you have no maidservants, and at the time we didn't quite get it because we'd never lived in India, and then later, actually in 2011, we moved to Mayapur for some years, and then we got it, because in India, generally speaking, there'll be some maidservants so that the mother, she's doing the cooking, all these things, but she has some help. And because she has some help, it's a little easier to chant her 16 rounds and to do all of the things that need to be done. Excuse me one moment. Anyway, my wife, she always appreciated that advice. And then when she ended up in Mayapur, she appreciated it even more, and it helped her a lot. So, he was very, very kind to us. Actually, he also indulged us. One time he was visiting, and a couple of his disciples had come down from LA that were book distributors there. And it was 4th of July, which is the American Independence Day. I know you just had your Indian Independence Day, I saw. But anyway, American. So they have this tradition of they send up fireworks, beautiful, fireworks in the sky. And somehow, Maharaj, he agreed to go with us. So we took him to a hillside overlooking this valley where they have these big, big fireworks, and we all stayed there together watching the fireworks, and he was preaching to us. So, he was always very, very, very gentle, you know what I mean? So even though so much was going on. So then a little later in the 90s, I was asked to do the service of temple president in San Diego. So we still had the preaching center, but we moved down to San Diego and we're serving there. And Maharaj was coming. And then this is another instance where I really appreciate and just wanted to share about his intense dedication. Of course, you all know, but about his intense dedication to Srila Prabhupada. Because at that time, he had started the Abhay Charan series, and I was hearing about it, you know what I mean? And as soon as they started producing them, we were getting them. And I think in those days, it was before DVDs. It was these tapes, and we would get them one at a time, and you put them in this tape player, and we had a little screen. Computers weren't so big then, So anyway, we one of our main focuses in the temple at that time was trying to encourage new people to become devotees. So once a week, we would invite all of the new devotees, the bhaktas and the bhaktins over, and we would watch the latest Abhay Charan. So we were doing that every week. We would show one episode, you know, each week. And sometimes a couple episodes, it just depends how fast they were coming. We would have kirtan and Abhay Charan video and prasadam like that. And it was a nice get together, you know, so we were really appreciating that service. And I remember hearing Maharaj speak about how, you know, he had been reading some book about important people, I don't know, of the year or of the decade. And it was really striking him that our Srila Prabhupada wasn't being glorified by the world in these ways, that people didn't know about Srila Prabhupada. And it really, you know, struck his heart. And he began the Abhay Charan series. So, you know, I was hearing all this and we were enjoying the videos. And then Maharaj came to America, you know, like I didn't see him for a while because he was in India with the filming, but then they came to America. And when they came to America, I actually got firsthand glimpse of how much, you know, weight Maharaj was taking to put that out. I mean, that wasn't easy. I don't know what it was like in India, but when he came to America, America is an expensive place. And it's not like India, you know, where temples have guest houses and all these things. Maharaj was traveling around America with like 30, 40 people, like actors, actresses, film crews. And he was having to like feed them, find them places to stay, keep them going, keep all the funds, like a whole thing, you know. And they did a lot of filming in Los Angeles and California and places. And I remember when they came through, actually one of his, maybe, you know, at the time he was a young man, this is over 20 years ago, Babai, he was the son of one of Maharaj's disciples from the Calcutta area, and he was doing the video editing. So while they were in California, he needed some place to do this editing. So we had a room in our preaching center and he stayed with us, and they were constantly sending him all of the videos to edit as they were shooting, you know. So I was getting some firsthand glimpse of all the different things that were going into that. And I remember when they came to LA, it was one of the few times that I saw Maharaj in a really intense mood. You know, Maharaj is so peaceful and so like, you know, polite and everything, but he was having to push really, really hard, you know, at that time. And there weren't such good facilities. They came to LA and he was having a little bit of difficulty getting everyone taken care of and properly situated. And I remember how hard he was pushing. And it just really underlined to me, you know, Maharaj's dedication to Srila Prabhupada, because it wasn't easy. That Abhay Charan, that was not, you know, he was personally pushing the entire project, like along with everything else he was doing, being a GBC, being a guru, but he was pushing that project. Like every step of it practically required his personal interaction. And if he didn't keep pushing, that would have never gotten finished, at least especially in the West, from what I could see, because it was not easy, you know? So anyway, you know, I just wanted to share a little bit of that, because probably you know all that, but sometimes when you see something firsthand, you know, like Maharaj probably didn't talk about all the struggle he put into that, but you could actually see how hard he was working, you know, to glorify Srila Prabhupada, so that the world would know about Srila Prabhupada, his life, his background, his history, like that. So, and I kind of hesitate to share this, but at the same time, I don't know, it's just a personal story. And I'm not a mystical person. I mean, I know some devotees, they're very mystical, they're very in tune subtly. I'm not. I'm just a very ordinary, gross kind of person. But one time, the same time in the 90s in San Diego at the temple, Maharaj was visiting and he led Guru Puja Kirtan, and he was leading such a nice kirtan, stand-up kirtan, Guru Puja, such a nice kirtan. And again, I'm not a real subtle person or anything like that, but somehow towards the end of the kirtan, I just had this really clear, distinct impression that just somehow, to put it in my own words, I was just seeing Srila Prabhupada in him, how Prabhupada was empowering him to carry on his movement. It just became so clear to me. It was like, you know, when I personally had some experience of Srila Prabhupada's association, it just brought me back to the most personal experience I had with Srila Prabhupada in his presence during his kirtan. And it was very moving to me. And I won't say more, because that's That's not what we base our movement on and our shiksha on, these mystical things. At the same time, they can be very real. And at least at that time, I was really perceiving how tuned in to Srila Prabhupada, His Holiness Bhakti Charu Maharaj, that he was really manifesting Prabhupada through himself, Prabhupada's mission, Prabhupada's desire, Prabhupada's will. So I know we're getting short on time. So moving on a little bit, the next decade, I'm kind of going chronologically, was the 2000s kind of, and we actually moved from the West Coast to Alachua, Florida at that time. We had 2 children. We tried to have a bit of a Gurukula, but we didn't have enough people at the time with kids, and it fell apart. So finally, we moved to Alachua, Florida. And fortunately for us, Maharaj also would visit Alachua. So although I didn't see him as much, and I wasn't very involved in service, and I'm mentioning this because Maharaj's mercy was so sweet that even when I wasn't doing much service, basically from 2000 until the present, I wasn't doing much anymore. Like I had to work to support a family, and that's basically what I was doing most of the time. But he came to Alachua, and one time he came, and actually you'll be happy to know that he was planning to develop the Ujjain community. And so he wanted to share that with the Alachua devotees. And so we had a home with a fairly large temple room. And so he kindly offered to do the program at our home. So we invited all the Alachua devotees, and Maharaj gave a whole presentation, using some video and some audio and his own speaking. And he introduced the Ujjain project. It wasn't done yet. He was getting ready to build the temple, and he was, getting devotees involved to help support if they were so, willing and things. But he made a whole presentation. We had a nice program. Maharaj led kirtan. He gave a whole presentation about what he was developing in Ujjain, how Ujjain was so important. Krishna had gone to Gurukula there, Sandipani Muni's ashram. He introduced it to the devotees in Alachua. And it's significant because Alachua, in America, it's where the most of the Prabhupada disciples are. They ended up. So it's a lot of his god brothers and god sisters, and he invited them all and told them what he was doing in Ujjain and why it was an important project, and introduced them to it. And it was very, very interesting. And while he was there, and this is a little intense, but again, I'm bringing this up to show just what a Prabhupada, quote unquote, Prabhupada man, Bhakti Charu Maharaj was. Unfortunately, in Alachua at that time, there was, and even now, but some devotees had become influenced by the Ritvik, what would you call it, Apasampradaya or whatever. But anyway, that idea, because, this goes back to the 80s when so many mistakes were made. And even some very senior devotees, they became disillusioned with their god brothers who had made mistakes and things. And they kind of went too far on the other side where they said, no, nobody can be guru, only Prabhupada, like that. It's not a proper Vedic understanding. But anyway, and some of them became very hardcore. And anytime any wild idea would come up, they would latch onto it. So Bhakti Charu Maharaj gave Bhagavatam class one day, and some devotee guy raised his hand, and he actually asked Maharaj, he tried to say that Prabhupada was poisoned, and that, because Maharaj was intimately serving Prabhupada along with Krishna Maharaj, that he would have known about it. And Bhakti Charu Maharaj, the way he responded to that challenge, he just lowered his head and kind of like did this. And he said, if I had ever had in any way done anything that would have hurt Srila Prabhupada, let me die right now. And he said it with such sincerity and such conviction that there wasn't a devotee in the temple, probably not even the guy who had the audacity to say such an abominable thing, who wasn't moved by it. So, Maharaj, he didn't try to challenge back. He just very humbly said, no way, And anyway, I was very moved by that. And afterwards, I talked to a lot of devotees who were very moved by that. And I actually apologized to Maharaj that it even happened. But, Maharaj's devotion to Srila Prabhupada is unquestionable. Another time, at that time, we went up to Hillsborough. Maharaj spent some time in North Carolina. And because he always cares about the devotees, he was trying to create businesses. He felt that devotees needed more, grihastas especially, needed more opportunities to support themselves. in the association of devotees, and he thought that there should be more devotee businesses. So he had helped Guru Granga Prabhu start a big prasadam business up there. And so he was spending time up there in that area, and he did a Briyat Bhagavatam Rita seminar at Hillsborough. So, we drove up there actually and had a few days of Maharaj's association. And at that time, just on a personal level, I wasn't doing much, but he was so kind. We went for a long drive together, and he was just asking me, talking about the preaching in North America. Things had kind of slowed down at that time, and he was asking my opinion, like what I thought we needed to do and like that. And I was like, Maharaj, but anyway, he was very, very kind. And I could see that he was very, very concerned about preaching in the USA because things were down a bit, it wasn't going as it had been going formerly. And he was concerned, and he was always trying to find ideas. So again, I didn't see him so much during that time. And then coming to 2010s to the present, and I know we have to end soon. So because our children had gone to Alachua, we moved there for school. And when they grew out of those schools, we went to Mayapur. And our son joined the Gurukula. And so we were there for about 8 or 9 years, actually. I didn't get to stay there more than 3 or 4 months a year because I was working in the West. I had to keep working. But my wife and children were there, and I would come and go. So I got to see Maharaj in Mayapur, and it was a little embarrassing almost because he was so kind. Like, although I'm nobody doing nothing, if I would see Maharaj for the first time, and he was with a group of important people, he would just walk over and just give you a big embrace, and welcome you and inquire about you and inquire about your family. And honestly, when he would give me an embrace, I would just be like I would just feel so spiritually purified and just so happy and just so blessed for like days, you know what I mean? Like I look forward to going to Mayapur, especially that if Maharaj was there, and I didn't deserve it. But anyway, he was, even to insignificant devotee like me, he was just so kind, and sometimes he would say, why don't you retire to Mayapur, and just stay here and do service. Unfortunately, I was very entangled. I'm not very good at business, and I was always struggling with money, so that wasn't possible. But he was always offering to help. Is there anything we can do to help you here in Mayapur? One time, my son, because he was involved in Gurukula, and they were doing some video work, and he didn't have the right equipment. And then, because I knew Maharaj because of his history with Abhay Charan, and he's always been into movies. And I said, well, why don't you check with Maharaj, And he approached Maharaj, and Maharaj immediately made a whole arrangement. He had some devotees loan all kinds of video equipment to the school and show him how to use it, and they shot a whole video, So he was always like that, and very, very kind to our children. Like he met, our daughter's name is Vrindavani, and she spent some time in Australia. And then they had this big program. I think it was the 50th anniversary of ISKCON at the Sydney Opera House, and Maharaj was there. And so, there's like hundreds of devotees there, and it's this giant program. And my daughter told me, I wasn't there, but like she was walking down some hallway, and all of a sudden Bhakti Charu Maharaj saw her, and he just came right up to her, and he remembered her and, called her by name and welcomed her and said, it's so good to see you. And he just made her feel, so wonderful, so even in the middle of, he was always like remembering us, just some, small little devotee family. So all of both my wife and children, they've all had these very endearing experiences where he was so kind to them and always encouraging them in their devotional service according to where they were at. So then in 2017, 18, I don't know the exact time, but I think around 2017, he started the Land Project. And I was back and forth between Mayapur and Florida, and Alachua is only about like a 2-hour drive from the land. So when I heard that Maharaj was starting this, I was very happy. So I would drive down there for the Sunday feasts, when Maharaj was there, and get his association. And it was really nice to be able to reconnect with him. And by Krishna's grace, because he was just getting it going, he spent a good time there, some months, maybe like 6 months. So we were getting more of his association. And then sometimes going over. He would also go over to Guru Garanga's and Suchitra's house in Orlando. So we were spending some time with him there. And at one time we were there, and it was interesting. He had just come back from New York. I think that year he was chairman of the GBC. And we had a big problem in New York. The temple management, they tried to sell the temple so many things. So anyway, Maharaj just went there, and he had to give this proclamation that actually this temple has to stay in ISKCON and has to be under the, GBC and has to follow. This is Prabhupada's temple. New York is a long history. Devotees anyway, long story. I won't go into the details, but Maharaj went there. And although Maharaj is, he teaches courses in Vaishnava etiquette, he's so kind and so sweet and so humble. He went there like a lion, and they turned off the microphone. They were trying to push the devotees out the door, and Maharaj just stood there. And he made this proclamation for ISKCON, and ultimately that temple was saved and, brought back into ISKCON. So he had just come back from there. And he told us a little bit about it. Later, I heard from other devotees that were there, the whole story. But it was amazing, it's just another instance of how anywhere where there's a problem, if Maharaj can help the situation, he goes there and does it, So we were having lunch that day, and he called it a bottomless pizza. It was like he had this special recipe anyway, and he was engaging us all in, cutting up and doing things. And then we all had lunch together. For a few days in a row, we spent with him there, and it was very sweet. So then, I'm not going to say too much about this because Kalakanta Prabhu is giving class in a day or two. But anyway, Kalakanta is my close friend. And when he was in America, I was helping him with the Cal protection a little bit, just as a person from America to help him connect. So Bhakti Charu Maharaj, when he saw that this devotee Kalakanta Prabhu was so sincere, he was made the minister of Cal protection and agriculture. But the budget was so small, and Bhakti Charu Maharaj realized nobody can carry on an international ministry with this budget. It's impossible. You can't even support a family with this budget in Mayapur, where he lives. So Bhakti Charu Maharaj realized, I want to help this devotee. This Cal protection, Prabhupada wanted it. It's so important. So he just got behind Kalakanta. So in the land, Kalakanta and I went there and met with him, and Maharaj came up with this whole idea that we'll make these bhakti boxes, and we'll have a subscription base, and we'll go to all the temples, and we'll present the Cal protection to them, and people will become members, and we'll make up a box every month of products from the Cal and devotional items, and we'll send them to them to reciprocate with their monthly pledge donation to help develop Cal protection in ISKCON, right? It's a wonderful idea. And so we started, and because of that service, I had a chance to meet with him a lot of times. Kalakanta and I were going there regularly. And then Maharaj said, let's go, So we went up to Atlanta, and we launched the program in Atlanta. Vedasari Prabhu was kind enough to have us. So Maharaj, he gave one special presentation about it to make members. And then at the Sunday feast, a different group of people came. He did the same thing again. We were there for about 3 days. And every day, all day, we were just going to people's houses, making the same presentation for Cal protection. Maharaj was working so hard. We were just, could barely keep up with him. It was we were catching our breath. So then we went back from there to the land, and, we're working on all the background arrangements. And then we went to LA, and he Savas Prabhu really loves Maharaj also, the president in LA. So Savas arranged for us to come right before Rath Yatra, LA Rath Yatra, biggest Rath Yatra in America, along with New York. So all the devotees are coming. So just a couple of days before Rath Yatra, we made the LA presentation, and it was really, really nice. And Maharaj, it was fantastic, actually. Devotees were really behind it. Meanwhile, our next stop was Laguna Beach. And I'll end with this. It's I'm going to save most of this Cal protection Bhakti Charu Maharaj nectar for Kalakanta because I saw he's on the list, and he's actually the right person. But our third stop for launching this promotion, really to get members for the Cal protection ministry, was supposed to be the Laguna Beach temple. Unfortunately, in the middle of it, we got a letter from the GBC, North American GBC. So the North American GBC were saying, hey, what are you guys doing? Nobody asked us. And, there's an old saying that it's easier to beg forgiveness than to ask permission. And in a place like North America, you know, sometimes that's very true because, I don't know, we didn't know, you know, Kalakanta is the global minister, so he's supposed to be running this all over the world. So it made sense that for what Maharaj was trying to help him do in North America, Maharaj's vision was amazing, to actually get a large piece of land, to take all of the cows from all of the goshalas in America when they got old and protect them so that the goshalas could keep going forward without, what happened before was that goshalas would get too many cows and then they couldn't support them and they're in cold places. So anyway, Maharaj had this amazing vision and we were working towards it. But then the GBC said, you know, no, you can't do this until you get prior permission. So I was relaying that to Maharaj and Kalakanta. And then that was before LA. So then we kind of made a deal and we said, I told them, I said, look, let us do LA and then we'll do all the things to get permission. So they agreed. And because LA was already scheduled. So they said, okay, you can do LA, but then you have to get our permission before you do any more, right? But then Laguna Beach was begging Maharaj to come. So they were going to do one more. But because I was connected with the local GBC because I used to live there for so many years serving under them. So I just kind of said, Maharaj, I won't be able to come to this one, but you and Kalakanta should go and do it. And so then, you know, I didn't say why. And then when they came back, I found out that Maharaj didn't do it. And what happened was he was so considerate when he realized that it would have been awkward for me because I had told the GBC that we wouldn't continue, that he just ended up giving the Sunday Feast lecture. And, you know, like, I felt bad, but he didn't want to put me in an awkward situation, you know? So anyway, so I know it's time to end. I'll just share one last personal thing was that right after the cow protection, we were working together, but then we had to get the GBC approval. So things slowed down. And I was volunteering, but I was facing some financial problems. So I had to go work. And I ended up working in Virginia for almost a year. And unfortunately, I didn't see Maharaj again after that, 2018. But in 2019, he came to Alachua and he was speaking with my wife after he gave class. And he asked her where I was. And she told him that I was, you know, working for all these months, running this art gallery anyway. And when Maharaj heard that I was not able to be serving, he was always encouraging me to get into serving again. And when he heard that I was absorbed in business, he said to her, when will it end? In a very compassionate way. And, you know, and he said, if there's anything I can do, please let me know. And when I heard that Maharaj had come back to America in 2020, I was so excited. And I told my son, let's go see Bhakti Charu Maharaj. And then a few days later, we heard about the COVID and that no one could go. And so I took that last statement of Maharaj anyway, you know, when will this end? When will this foolish person start serving Krishna again? And I'm kind of taking that as my mission. So I'm trying to wrap up these other things and try and be more involved in service by Maharaj's mercy. So anyway, I'll end there. Sorry if I went a little over time. His Holiness Bhakti Charu Maharaj ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you very much for your nectarian class. Just a few questions are there if you want to take.
Oh, sure, if you have time.
Yeah. So there is one question. Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, please accept my humble obeisances. What was your feeling when Srila Prabhupada left this world and you missed opportunity to be initiated by him? How you could able to accept any other as your spiritual master when you have offered your heart to Srila Prabhupada?
Thank you. That's a very good question. Again, I was fairly young. I know devotees that joined at that age. I wasn't that intelligent. When I had the opportunity to be in the presence of Srila Prabhupada, I was 18. And many times I regret, perhaps, but, you know, like, well, it's a personal question, so I'll give a personal answer. I just wasn't ready at that time. Had I been ready, the opportunity was there. In those days, it wasn't that hard to get initiated. Sometimes it could go quite quickly. I have to say that at that time in my heart, I accepted Srila Prabhupada as my spiritual master. I didn't see any other spiritual guide. I accepted Prabhupada's teachings as complete absolute truth. I had no doubt about Srila Prabhupada or his mission. Only I had doubt about myself, about my ability to sincerely surrender. And, then the day Prabhupada left, I happened to, I lived about 100 miles from the nearest temple. So we had a temple in our home, but I would go to the temple also sometimes. I happened to go to the temple that day, and I hadn't been there in quite a while, to be honest with you. I was a little bit out of the loop right then. And when I came in the temple that day, something was different. As soon as I walked in, I came in the morning, and usually at that point I had been going to the temples for 7 years. And, like temple was always like joy, and it was like light, and it was like love and light and everything like that. And I came in, and all the devotees' faces were like white and pale, and everything was quiet, and everybody was like down, and I didn't know what was going on. I'd never, And then a devotee named Brubrit, he was a treasurer. He pulled me aside and he told me that Prabhupada just left the planet. We just got the word. And I just was in shock, And my very first sentiment, my very first thing that I thought was, I guess this is all over now, because I couldn't really imagine a movement without Srila Prabhupada. It had never been. Prabhupada was, although he had so many, all over the world, he was the central person with every single devotee in the movement. You know what I mean? It was that, and I thought, oh my God, first I thought I was in disbelief, because when I had seen Prabhupada in 75, just 2 years earlier, for one thing, when Prabhupada got out of the car from the airport, right? I didn't go to the airport because I was cleaning the porch of his quarters, and it kept getting dirty because it was rainy, and devotees would walk in and leave mud, and I would clean it again. So then finally the GBC came and said, okay, you go shower, Prabhupada's coming, So I ran, got dressed, and I was just coming down the stairs from the ashram, and I heard the kirtan, mridanga, karta. I looked out, and there was Prabhupada. He'd gotten out of his car, and he was coming. And the first thing I saw was he was floating, and the devotees, young men, were running to keep up with him, And I did full dandavats, and when I came up, Prabhupada had already come about 50 feet, walking, just while I did dandavats. And I came up, and Prabhupada was about 4 feet away from me. He was coming forward, all the devotees running behind him doing kirtan, and the temple room door was there. And then Prabhupada went through the temple room door, and we all followed in. But that was my first glimpse of Prabhupada's Vapu. And he was so full of life and so full of energy and so just radiating spirituality. So when I heard that Prabhupada disappeared, it didn't even it was very hard to understand, because he was on the spiritual platform, So I was very immature, obviously. So I thought this must be the end, but I stayed at the temple all day until night. And by nighttime, I realized that I was completely wrong, because all day I saw the offerings were being cooked, the artis were being done. Although the devotees were suffering the most painful experience of their lives, they were going on. And even in the very first moments of finding out that Prabhupada had left, immediately everyone began to realize that he hasn't left, because he's there in his Vani. He always taught us, it's the Vani, follow my Vani, right? Prabhupada taught us that the entire time he was here. He wrote thousands of letters, he gave thousands of classes, and he always taught us it's the Vani. The real following is the Vani. Prabhupada always taught us that. Prabhupada said he only associated with the spiritual master a few times, but he was never out of the association of the spiritual master, because he was always making his Vani the first and foremost principle of his life, right? As Bhakti Charu Maharaj has done with Srila Prabhupada. So anyway, long answer, but anyway, after Prabhupada left, I was in shock, and it took me about almost a year from that time, there's a lot of confusion, but a little less than a year later, I finally moved into Brahmachari ashram. And then at that time, I came in the temple and I saw there were two Vyasasans. In those days, the Zonal Acharya time, they would have Prabhupada's Vyasasan and they would have the Vyasasana of the Zonal Acharya. And I'd never seen that before, because we only had the one with Prabhupada, And but anyway, I saw that this is continuing and this is how it's continuing, And so then I took it up full time, and I was offered shelter by one of his disciples, Rameshwar Prabhu. And so, to answer your question, I just wasn't ready, And although sometimes I regret it, in other ways, if you're not ready, you're not ready, And, like Diksha is a manifestation of Shiksha, right? Prabhupada explains that the relationship is a relationship of Shiksha. And generally, one's primary Shiksha Guru will become one's Diksha Guru in course of time. But we are a Shiksha line, we are a Shiksha line. And like Bhakti Charu Maharaj, we're all connected with Prabhupada. I know from everything I know about Maharaj, and you know better than me, when he has his Vyasa Pujas, what does he call it? Prabhupada Memorial Festival, right? Right? He won't accept praise, he won't accept worship, he won't accept any of that without it being 1,000% clear that it's being offered to Prabhupada through him, isn't it? Right? So in that way, I don't really have regrets because I feel connected with Srila Prabhupada through his disciples and through his Shiksha. Prabhupada is the primary Shiksha Guru for everybody in ISKCON for 10,000 years. And some devotees say that is not in the Veda base, right? I've heard that, and it probably isn't. And I talked to the same Mataji I quoted earlier, Mother Kanka. She mentioned to me when I was at her home the other day that in Berkeley Temple, she was in a room and Prabhupada was being interviewed by reporters for a television station. And they were asking Prabhupada, different questions. And Srila Prabhupada said, they asked something like, how will the movement go on or whatever. And Prabhupada said, my books are there. And Prabhupada said he said, my books will be the law books for mankind for the next 10,000 years. So that's another reference. She just told me that the other day. She was present there while Prabhupada was being interviewed by a television station in Berkeley, California. So I'm looking forward to trying to find that. So anyway, long answer short is that taking shelter of Prabhupada's sincere followers is the same as taking shelter of Srila Prabhupada. And don't ever have any doubts about that. This movement will expand for thousands of years. This is the golden age of Lord Chaitanya, and it goes on via parampara, right? Does that answer your question?
Yes, Prabhu. Thank you very much for your wonderful answer. So these were all questions by devotee. If anybody has any question, they can raise their hand in the chat box. Okay, there is one more question. Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. What are the specific attributes of Srila Prabhupada that you saw in Bhakti Charu Swami as well?
Well, one of them, which I tried to mention, was his utter and complete dedication to the mission of his spiritual master. One of the few classes I went to that Srila Prabhupada gave in Philadelphia in 1975, I felt that he was revealing to us one of his secrets because he was lecturing on the 6th canto, the Ajamil section. It wasn't published yet. He was actually lecturing from manuscript, right? And it was published shortly thereafter. So in one lecture, Prabhupada quoted Guru Mukha Padma Vakya, Chittati Koreya Aikya. And then he said to us in the class, he said, do you know the meaning? And nobody said anything right away. Devotees by then, kind of like shy, in front of Prabhupada. And then Prabhupada said, you are singing every day and you do not know the meaning? Like a parrot. He said, this is not good. And then someone raised their hand and gave the proper answer. And then Prabhupada said, yes. And then Prabhupada said, Chittete means heart, and it means understanding. Oh, sorry, he said Chaitanya means heart and it means consciousness. And he said the disciple in his heart, he understands, my guru wants this, I have to accomplish it, boss. Prabhupada said, my guru wants this, I have to do it, boss. And then Prabhupada said, it is not my pride, but for your understanding, I will tell you, I did it. And then Prabhupada said, amongst all my God brothers, I did it. That his spiritual master wanted this movement spread all over the world. And Prabhupada took that order on his head. My guru wants this, I have to do it, boss, right? And that is the special quality that I see in Bhakti Charu Maharaj, because I don't see anything he's done that was in any way, shape, or form separate from the instructions that Srila Prabhupada gave him, right? Prabhupada wanted the books translated into Bengali. He translated the entire set into Bengali. He spent years and years doing that, right? And then he began to do, along with that, but after that even more, he began to do so many other services that Prabhupada wanted, right? His whole life was a testament to Srila Prabhupada's Vani, right? So that is the specific, many other qualities are there, but that's the specific quality that strikes me the most, is that what Prabhupada taught us, that my guru wants this, I have to do it, boss. That understanding, which Prabhupada presented himself, is what I see in Bhakti Charu Maharaj as a very, very, very important quality that reminds me of Srila Prabhupada, which I feel is the most essential quality of a disciple, and who becomes a spiritual master also. But is that okay?
Yes, thank you very much, Prabhu.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for your wonderful session. You took us chronologically into the life of Srila Guru Maharaj, various contributions and lessons from his life. You mentioned about how he came in contact. First, you met with Bhakti Charu Swami Maharaj in his first US preaching tour, and how you saw that he was so refined personality, his interactions with different type of audience, and how he was able to relate with everyone. And being a sannyasi and senior devotee, he was very approachable. You used to go for book distribution with him, and how he was moved by his depth in the dedication of Srila Prabhupada. And you shared about how ISKCON passed through difficult phases, and how Bhakti Charu Swami Maharaj used to find the ways and opportunities to jump into these matters and help without any personal motive, just to please Srila Prabhupada.
Wholeheartedly.
And how during difficult time he started to lecture on the seminars on Srila Prabhupada, the position of Srila Prabhupada, and help the devotees. How he was very eager to bring all the devotees back into the movement, like you told about Rameshwar Prabhu. And you told about how he was very kind, and how he used to just act in the benefit of ISKCON. And Srila Prabhupada, you narrated the pastime of Sridhar Maharaj, that he didn't care for his personal relations, but what was good for ISKCON, he chose that. And regarding reinitiation, you talked, and then you told about this Brooklyn temple and New Mayapur, how he was always ready to help. And you told about this very important his answer to the devotee who asked about Srila Prabhupada poisoning, and he answered without any going to any controversial statement. He just spoke that everybody was moved. Let me die. If what was that, Prabhuji? You can repeat that.
I'm paraphrasing because my memory is not so good. But basically, he folded his hands and very humbly said, if I had ever done anything that could have hurt Srila Prabhupada, let me die immediately on the spot.
Yeah.
I would never do anything to hurt my dear Srila Prabhupada. And he said it was such humility and such conviction that, I think that issue was laid to rest.
Yeah. So in a very nice way, he answered that question, and he moved everyone. And you at last shared about this, how taking shelter of any of the sincere follower of Srila Prabhupada means taking shelter of Srila Prabhupada. This question was very much relevant because many devotees are thinking now like this, because they have heard or they have dedicated their heart to as well as Bhakti Charu Swami Guru Maharaj. Then thinking of other, it's little difficult. So your answer would have a great solace for them. So we are very indebted. We are very thankful to you, Pro, for taking out your time and
I'm
so
grateful
nice.
to all of you for allowing me.
So nicely narrated so many pastimes from life of Srila Bhakti Charu Swami Guru Maharaj. And we can see how all the Srila Prabhupada disciples like you all are working so hard to take the movement forward, like it's making the pathway for all of us to move further. So those who move in the front, they always have so many troubles and so many difficulties, but still you all are accepting all these things just so that we all can move smoothly in our spiritual life. So we seek for your blessings so that we can imbibe all these teachings and the mood to continue in the mission of Srila Prabhupada and contribute our throughout our life. And we look forward to have your association sometime at Ujjain. So
Thank you. I'd love to come.
kindly, whenever you are planning to come to India, Mayapur, please have a visit at Ujjain. Also, we seek your blessing.
I'd love to. Thank you so much. Thank all of you. All glories to His Holiness Bhakti Charu Maharaj. Ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai.
Thank you.
His Grace Vaikuntha Prabhu ki jai. So we express our heartfelt gratitude by chanting one time Hare Krishna Mahamantra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you very
Hare
much.
Krishna. Thank you.